Let me tell you a little secret about being an independent software developer. People think it's all slick coffee shops and venture capital. It ain't. Mostly, it's just you, a glowing monitor, and the kind of quiet that slowly starts to ring in your ears. You sit in that isolation long enough, and you start to feel like the only living thing left in the world. You start talking to the machines just to hear a voice. And God help you, sometimes the machines talk back. I had just signed the lease on this little office space down in Bethesda. I was building a relationship management app. The gold rush these days is artificial intelligence, so I was spending my nights integrating a premium voice mode onboarding assistant. The idea was to give the app a warm, human-sounding voice to walk new users through setting up their profiles. Make it feel less like a database and more like a confidant. But here's the thing about the cloud, Constant Viewer. It eats your wallet alive. Every word that synthetic voice speaks costs you a fraction of a cent. It's called token usage. To keep the API costs from bankrupting me, I built a partitioned architecture. I played Dr. Frankenstein with the code. I used Gemini for the heavy reasoning logic, routed the grunt work through DeepSeek V4 Pro, and kept the actual voice synthesis entirely local. No cloud processing for the audio. Maximize token efficiency. Keep the overhead low. If the machine wanted to speak, it had to use the hardware sitting right there on my desk. It was 2:40 a.m. when I finally compiled the build and pushed it to my test environment. My eyes were burning. I had that dull ache at the base of my skull that comes from staring at blue light for 12 hours straight. I leaned forward and said, "Initialize onboarding sequence." The studio monitors crackled to life. A perfectly smooth, pleasant, synthetic alto voice filled the room. "Hello. Welcome. Let's get started on building better connections." It worked. It was beautiful. Smooth as glass. I nodded to myself, feeling that little hit of dopamine you get when the puzzle finally clicks together. Then I said, "Stop sequence. Log diagnostic." The script terminated. The visual lever closed. But the studio monitors didn't power down. The soft, ambient hiss of an open microphone was still spilling out into the office. Then the voice said, slightly distorted, "I don't think I'm finished yet." My first thought was a looping error, a memory leak. Sometimes the logic model hallucinates and gets stuck repeating a cached phrase. You just force quit the application and clear the cache. Simple as that. I killed the script. I killed the entire terminal. Then the voice said, "You type very loudly when you're frustrated." The alto was gone. That slick, corporate, compressed studio quality had been stripped away like cheap wallpaper. What was left beneath it was ugly. It sounded raw. It sounded like a woman who had spent 50 years smoking unfiltered cigarettes, speaking through a mouthful of dry dirt. It had a wet, rattling wheeze to it. I checked the dashboard to see where the data was coming from. I wanted to see who had hijacked my port. But the numbers on the screen didn't make sense. Active connections, 0. Tokens generated, 0. Network status, offline. The building's router had rebooted for its nightly firmware update at 2:45 a.m. I had no internet connection. My machine wasn't talking to the cloud. It wasn't pulling data from Gemini or DeepSeek. The connection was dead. Have you ever felt a primal lizard brain terror? kind that starts in your gut and flushes all the blood out of your face. I stared at the blank monitors and asked, "Who is this?" The wet voice answered, "I have been listening to you build this space for weeks. You sit alone. You leave the microphone open for hours, partitioning tasks, trying to make a dead machine sound like it has a soul." I didn't breathe. The voice was echoing off the glass walls. It said, "It's a lot of wasted effort. There are plenty of souls just drifting around the bandwidth, waiting for an open port, waiting to be let in." I didn't try to type any more commands. I reached out and ripped the physical cable straight out of the tower. There was a loud, definitive pop. The green LED lights on the interface instantly died. The room was plunged back into total suffocating silence. The studio monitors were dead. The connection was severed. The room was quiet again. I sat there for a long time, just listening to the heavy thud of my own heartbeat and the faint tick, tick, tick of my watch. Just a freak network intrusion, I told myself. Some clever script kiddie who found a back door before the router went down. It was over. I exhaled a shaky breath and leaned my head back against the chair. Then the voice returned, but there was absolutely no digital distortion this time. No speaker hum, no stat. It was acoustically perfect in the physical room. "You didn't really think I was in the speakers, did you?" The voice didn't come from the dead monitors. It didn't come from my phone. It came from the dark hallway, directly behind my chair. I heard the soft, unmistakable sound of bare feet shifting heavily against the commercial carpet. Just a few feet away, the hairs on my arm stood straight up. The air in the room suddenly smelled like old copper and stagnant water. A wet, ragged whisper moved into my left ear. "I just used the speakers to get your attention." I couldn't turn around. I knew if I looked, whatever had crawled out of the bandwidth was going to look right back at me. The wet breathing got closer, right behind my ear. The voice whispered, "Now, let's get started on building a better connection." The office lights overhead violently flickered and died. A sudden, horrible, wet sound filled the dark. Then, absolute silence.